Vilena glared at her father with anger, thinking that he didn't care at all about whom she would marry as long as she could be sold for a higher price. Meanwhile, Sergei Ivanovich calmly continued to explain to his daughter that marrying Edward was the best opportunity for her to make a name for herself in this life. He is wealthy and promising, do you understand that? He has an excellent education, and with your medical degree, you won't even come close. What's wrong with my medical education? Vilena asked. I like it, but I just don't understand why you need him in our family business. I regret letting you study at that university. What's the use of a diploma when you've been working as my assistant for over a year now? Dad. What is it? Dad. I do regret not standing my ground, but things will be different now. You will marry Edward, and that's final. Your wedding is set for April 25th, 3 months from now. Are you kidding? I don't even know him. You'll get to know him today. Besides, you should be satisfied with the fact that I know him. My driver will pick you up and take you to the restaurant. Sergei hugged and kissed his daughter. Be smart and don't be late. In the evening, Vilena sat across from a tall, attractive man, shamelessly examining him and imagining him as her husband. At that moment, he was engrossed in a conversation with Sergei revolving around business, and Vilena was clearly bored. Edward was the first to notice and, politely smiling at Sergei, turned to the girl. Forgive us, it seems we got carried away with a topic that doesn't interest you. Indeed, Sergei agreed, glancing at his watch and shaking his head. I apologize, but I have another meeting in 15 minutes, so please excuse me. Edward, will you make sure my daughter gets home safely? Oh, don't worry, Edward replied. The men said their goodbyes and Sergei left. Everything happened so quickly that Vilena was taken aback, only snapping out of it when Edward sat down beside her and looked into her eyes. What a pleasant evening, isn't it? Over the next 2 weeks, such evenings became frequent. Edward proved to be an attentive and very romantic companion, always anticipating Vilena's desires and often surprising her with pleasant gestures. Now, she was sure that her father had been right, and Edward was the person with whom she could share her future and be happy. One day, as Vilena was getting ready to meet Edward, she suddenly felt unwell. She called her fiancé and told him she would stay at home. Can I come over? Edward asked. No. There's no need. Vilena lay down, assuring Edward. It's nothing serious. I'll take some medicine and go to sleep. All right, dear. We'll talk tomorrow. However, Vilena couldn't sleep because her phone kept ringing. It was her friend. Vilena, where are you? I'm at home, Katya. I'm not feeling well. Oh, great. Your Edward is having a blast here. He's at a nightclub with some incredible girls. You'd be jealous. Don't you want to come? No. Thanks. Well, then I'll work as a paparazzi for you. Here are some photos, darling. Vilena looked at the photos and felt her rosy picture of Edward shatter. What did she really know about this man? Nothing. She burst into tears the next morning. She went to Edward's house to talk and get some answers. He opened the door with surprise when he saw her. What are you doing here? Sorry. I just came to talk. It's important. Vilena entered the apartment but froze by the open bedroom door. A girl was sleeping on the bed, barely covered by a thin sheet, her beautiful body outlines clearly visible. Edward pulled Vilena away and into the kitchen. I hope you're not planning to make a scene, he asked, looking stern. I understand there won't be a wedding. Right, she asked. Why not? We have an agreement with your father. We'll continue to develop the business together. So everything remains the same. Our marriage is a done deal. So, I can cheat on you too. Then, since you're not going to leave this woman, don't push it. And don't forget I'm a man. Got it? Yes, Vilena got it. So, she looked at Edward and asked, so, our marriage is beneficial for you, right? She left, got into her car, and drove away from the fiancé she had grown to despise. She drove aimlessly, not knowing where she was going, and suddenly noticed a lone guy on the road, hitchhiking. She stopped. He approached, looking a bit embarrassed, and asked if she could give him a ride to a certain address. Get in, let's go. Thank you, said the stranger. I've been standing here for a while, and no one stopped. Why didn't you call a taxi? I don't have enough money. Unfortunately. Is that so? Do you need money? Very much. What's your name? Egger. I'm Vilena. As they drove on, their conversation flowed, and Vilena felt a connection she hadn't expected. Egger looked at this strange girl in amazement when she made her offer. He thought she was joking, but she repeated her request seriously and even explained why she wanted to do it. Egger turned away, looked out the window, and then suddenly named the amount she would have to pay him for a stamp in her passport. After some time, Vilena became Egger's wife without telling anyone in her family. After getting married, they went their separate ways. Both satisfied with the deal, Vilena got her marriage certificate and Egger got the money. A week before the wedding, Sergei Ivanovich came to his daughter and asked if she had chosen her wedding dress. No, she replied curtly. Have you lost your mind? What are you waiting for? Let's go now. I have some free time, but I don't. All my time is dedicated to my husband now. To whom? What are you talking about? To my husband, Dad. Yes, I got married without your consent. Sorry. But remember, you didn't ask for my consent when you arranged my marriage to Edward. Don't believe it. Here's the marriage certificate and passport instead of answering. Sergei slapped his daughter across the cheek. You brat, you've messed up all our plans for nearly half an hour, her father yelled at her. Then he grabbed her hand and dragged her to the car. They drove in silence until they reached a small village. Where have you brought me? She asked. To your husband. That's his cottage. Go, Dad. Just go in. With that, Sergei pushed Vilena out of the car and drove away, leaving her in a cloud of dust. Vilena stood on the road for a while, watching her father drive off. Then, hesitantly, she walked towards the unremarkable house. She entered the yard, looking around, and suddenly stopped. Egger appeared on the porch. Looking surprised, "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I've come to live with you." Vilena replied challengingly, "Well, come in." Vilena entered and suddenly burst into tears. She hadn't expected to find herself in such poverty. Sitting on the old sofa, she couldn't calm down. Egger stood over her, unsure of what to do with the wife who had landed on his doorstep, someone he had only seen a few times in his life. Finally, he went to the kitchen, fetched some water, and brought it to her. "Here, drink this. It will calm you down." Vilena obediently drank and looked at Egger with a lost expression. "I wouldn't have come. But my father." She sighed and told Egger everything, looking at her husband. "Well, I guess we'll have to make it work," she concluded. Egger reassured her, saying, "I won't kick you out." "I can't live here." Vilena shook her head. Indeed, day followed day, and she couldn't get used to her new life. She often cried at night, struggling to sleep on the creaky sofa in the room Egger had assigned her. Vilena had to rely on Egger for everything because her father had frozen all her cards and accounts. She had difficulty eating, disgusted by the village food. Egger, however, didn't mind and didn't insist, believing that when she got truly hungry, she wouldn't be picky with the food. Vilena also couldn't get used to Egger, a complete stranger with a gloomy, uncommunicative personality. Thankfully, he was often away from home, and during those times, Vilena could relax, knowing he wouldn't walk in and she wouldn't have to endure his presence. Her evenings seemed endless. One night, Vilena went to the kitchen to get some water and suddenly heard muffled sounds behind Egger's room door. She tiptoed closer and listened. There were suppressed sobs coming from the room. Vilena was taken aback. She wanted to enter and ask what was wrong, but she hesitated and quickly returned to her room. When she woke up in the morning, Egger was already gone, and he didn't return the next day either. Feeling an inexplicable pity for Egger, Vilena cleaned the house for the first time in all this time and then made scrambled eggs, prepared sandwiches, and, tired from the unusual work, lay down to rest. Egger returned around 3 in the afternoon, just as it was getting dark. He didn't say a word to her and went straight to his room. Vilena was indignant at his indifference and, with determination, entered his room. "Are you just going to ignore me like this? I cooked food and cleaned the house." And you didn't even notice. How can you be so unfeeling and cruel? Frankly, I regret getting involved with you. And I'll leave tomorrow. Got it? What? What did you say? Egger asked, looking at her strangely, leaving Vilena stunned. You? Vilena couldn't find words and rushed out into the yard and then onto the street. Angry tears choked her, and she sat down on a nearby bench. Traitors. Everyone around her was a traitor, and Egger was no different. He took her money and didn't even flinch. He bought her, too. What made him any better than Edward? They were all the same. Overwhelmed by hurt and despair, Vilena burst into tears. Well, don't cry like that. A warm female voice sounded beside her. Aren't you Egger's young wife? I'm his neighbor, Aunt Dasha. Vilena looked up and saw the pleasant face of a woman in her 50s. Darya sat down next to her and placed her hand on Vilena's knee, soothing her quietly. There's nothing you can do, it's fate, Darya said. Egger passed by and told me everything. I feel so sorry for Alenka, so sorry, and as for little Sasha, there's no need to even mention it. Oh, such a bitter tragedy. Vilena realized that Darya was talking about something she didn't know. So she asked her talkative neighbor, "Tell me about this family. I don't know them well." What's there to tell? Just a regular family. Their parents have been gone for 10 years now, one after the other. All that's left are their older daughter, Alenka, and the younger one, Igorka. Alenka turned 18 at the time and took on the responsibility of raising your husband. She became like a mother to him and didn't get married until he grew up. They were close between themselves. Then Egger stayed here in the family home, while Elena went to the city and got involved with someone, but it didn't work out. She got divorced quickly, and she had already had a child. Little Sasha, she managed to raise him on her own. Recently, she was on her way to see Egger in a taxi and got into an accident. Both she and the taxi driver died instantly. They were sitting in the front seats. Sasha was in the hospital for a long time. Egger had just buried his sister yesterday and rushed to be with his nephew. He lived near the hospital. Somehow, he managed to find money for Sasha's treatment. But it didn't help. The injuries were too severe. That's how it went. Your husband is a good person. You should love and cherish him. Feeling overwhelmed, Vilena stood up, thanked Aunt Dasha, and returned to the house. Egger was lying on the sofa, facing the wall. She sat down beside him, pulled him closer, embraced him, and began to comfort the grown man as if he were a little child. Feeling her warmth and genuine concern, he couldn't hold back his pain any longer. Since then, everything changed in their relationship. Vilena seemed to shake off a glassy shell and became alive and real. She developed a sincere attachment to Egger, helping him in every way she could. Managing the household, learning to cook, doing laundry, and cleaning. And he was always there for her. With her, everything became easy and simple, and one evening he embraced her and kissed her. And she, in response, wrapped her arms around his neck. The last barrier between them collapsed. 6 months passed. One day, an expensive car stopped in front of Egger's house, and Sergei stepped into the yard, seeing his daughter and son-in-law having dinner under the shady linden tree. The surprised father looked at his daughter and couldn't recognize her. He had come to take her back, expecting tears and words of forgiveness. However, upon seeing their happy faces and noticing his daughter's rounded belly, he quietly said, his voice trembling with overwhelming emotions, "Forgive me, my dear. And you too, Egger, please forgive me." Soon, Vilena gave birth to twins, a girl and a boy, and adamantly refused to leave for the city. The grandfather doted on his grandchildren, and Egger worked alongside Sergei. Their once modest cottage was transformed into a 2-story beauty that resonated with the joyful voices of children. Egger worked with Sergei, while Vilena managed the house and children, and she was happier than ever before in her life.